Welcome back, everyone. It's time for a meta update yet again. My name is Josh Joshi Howard, and today we're going to be talking about all the cool stuff that's happening in the guard meta over the past weekend and everything that we're talking about. Last week we had a relatively short video. We only had 3 singles lists, and I like 1 or 2 teams lists to show you guys. This week we have a whole 10 singles list that I have on the docket to show you guys. So it is going to take a little bit more time than we took last time. However, we'll see how long that actually takes us. I do want to start off by saying, if you guys watched last week we had a really bad weekend. We had a 43% win rate overall, whereas this weekend we had a much better, nearly 10% better, 51.7% over a little over 300 games coming out for guard. So we had a lot of players, but one of the big things that made this so much better this time around than what we were seeing last time around was the fact that the Canadians were out in force. We had a lot of really strong Canadians playing this last week. And one of the other things that was really interesting is you'll notice that there's like a bunch of really big gaps in here. I think it's this one. Um, there was the Paris War Games Expo over in France, and one of the big things about that is a lot of those players are either really underrated in terms of their elo, or they just don't have an elo because they tend to not use mini war, or they use like mini headquarters, I think it's called, and so not as many of their events like actually get put into the singles. Also, they just don't play as much singles as like the rest of the world does. France is much more teams focused than a lot of other countries are. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start talking about the list that we actually saw. The first one is coming in from the Paris War Game Expo, coming in Richard Garcia, a player that I have not seen before. If you want all of this information as well, there's a link down in the description so you can take a look at all of the list for even further instead of just like pausing the video. But Richard went 4-1 at the Paris Wargame Expo with a tanks and midboard list. Not a whole lot of innovation coming out in basically any of the lists that we're going to be talking about today. However, we have Gaunt's Ghost, Ursula Creed, 1 Cadian Command Squad, 2 Rogue Commanders with no enhancements, 10-man Cadian Shock Troops, 2 units of Catachan Jungle Fighters, only 1 unit of 6 Bulgrin, all with Brute Shields and Mauls, 2 units of Kazarkin, Alhahan, 2 Vanquishers, and 2 Chimeras. Pretty standard stuff overall. One of the things that we have been seeing a little bit is one of the classic combinations of units that you would see was a Catachan Jungle Fighters with a Chimera and Ogren inside. As we've had to like trim a lot of the fat over the past like year or so since that really became popular. So one of the things that we have been seeing a little bit more is like Catachan scouting up a transport for Kazarkin to hop inside. So that might have been something that Richard was doing in this. However, I think the most interesting thing about this list is it's got an unusual number of Bulgrin. I'm a pretty big believer that if you're going to be taking Bulgrin at all, it should be at 0 or at least 12, 12 to 18. 12 has been like a sweet spot that a lot of people have found. One of the big reasons for this is, of course, that 1 unit of Bulgrin, your opponent can play around even as you throw it into the middle of the board, because if they're fast enough, they can go around it. However, if you have 2 units of Bulgrin, it's much more difficult for opponent to just kind of ignore them. However, this has just a bunch of other pretty good units coming in, right? We got the Chimeras, we got the Kazarkin, a couple of Vanquishers, 2 Dorns, very normal stuff coming through. 4-1 coming out for Richard Garcia at Paris Wargame Expo. Another one that we have, this one at the Tennessee Elite Open, which happened not in Tennessee, but Kentucky, actually, right across the border, at least if Tactical Tortoise, I believe, was the one who was streaming it this last weekend. We had Giacomo Torelli, one of the players coming out from the greater Atlanta area, I believe, also playing Combined Arms, and Giacomo went 5-1, getting 3rd place overall out of 108 players. Let's go ahead and take a look at the list. We have 1 Cadian Command Squad, Gaunt's Ghost, 1 Militarum Tempestus Command Squad, 2 Roguethorn Commanders, Ursula Creed, 1 unit of Cadian Shock Troops, 2 units of Cadian Shock Troops, 1 more unit of Catachan Jungle Fighters, 2 Toraxes, 1 Hellhound, 2 units of Kazarkin, 1 unit of Kree Combat Engineers, 1 Luminar's Battle Tank, Scout Sentinel, and then 5 Tempestus Scion. So a lot of very normal looking stuff. Again, a lot of fairly standard data sheets coming through. One of the big things that we do see about this is typically a lot of combined arms. I would still argue that 3 Kazarkin is the standard number of Kazarkin if you're going to be taking them at all. However, in order to make room for the Militarum Tempestus Command Squad or the Scion Command Squad and the 5 extra Scions, this is 155 points. So we do one of the ways that we can do that is we drop 1 unit Kazarkin to a unit of 5 Kree combat engineers, and that basically seems to be one of the big things that we're seeing about Giacomo's list. I believe there was one of Giacomo's games available on Tactical Tortoise. I remember they played up against Sisters, I think it was, on a Purge the Foe game. But overall, pretty normal stuff coming out here. Again, not a whole lot of like new stuff. It is one of the variants of combined arms that have fewer transports. I still like the 3 transports with Kazarkin inside, but this reduces the number of transports. Just the 1 unit Catachan, and then you have Toraxes with Kazarkin at some point. So again, pretty normal stuff. Lots of just units running around coming out from Giacomo. So congratulations on the 3rd place there. The next one, we have Jerome Connolly, and this is Jerome's 3rd time appearing on this spreadsheet. I believe this is the first time that we've seen him get an event win recently. Yeah, 4-1 at Hobby Henchman and 31 players, and at the London GT, 4-1 out of nearly 1,100 players. So Jerome coming up once again, this time with a combined arms list. Keating Command Squad with the Grand Strategist, 1 Catachan Command Squad, God's Ghost and Ogren Bodyguard, 1, 2, 3 Rogaldorn Commanders, 1 unit Acadian Shock Troops, 1 Catachan Jungle Fighters, 2, 3 Catachan Jungle Fighters, 1, 2 Death Riders, 1, 2 Kazarkin, and then 2 Vanquishers. So probably the most interesting thing about this list is the Catachan Command Squad with the Ogren Bodyguard. One of the interesting things I oftentimes see about the Ogren Bodyguard, because typically when you have just like a Catachan Command Squad, you usually pair it with an Ogren Bodyguard, whereas the Cadians are usually going to be the ones staying at home. But the Ogren Bodyguard here, typically you will see it given a Ripper gun, and the Catachan Command Squad having a Master Vox and Regimental Standard are like slightly less common than what we see. What I tend to see a little bit more often is you take the Ripper gun on the Ogren Bodyguard, and then you take a Plasma, a Heavy Flamer, and then either a Flamer or a Melt-A-Gun as your other part of the Catachan Command Squad, because it gives the entire unit assault. I'm not sure exactly how Jerome had this unit arranged with the Catachan Command Squad, whether or not it was attached to any of the Catachan Jungle Fighters, but I typically don't see Catachan Command Squads attached to Jungle Fighters. But otherwise, Death Riders, still only 2 units of Kazarkin coming through, and no transport. So a little bit different, a little bit more firepower coming out of this because there are the 3 Rogaldorn Commanders coming out for Jerome, but you still have plenty of things to brawl in the midboard. And both Vanquishers with multi-meltas, these are actually midboard pieces most of the time. If you see them with plasma cannons, these are the ones that tend to sit a little bit further back. But Jerome, this is the first time I've seen them. I think I've seen them get an event win, but also their 3rd appearance. So well done in having a good like September and October overall from Jerome. So, well, very good stuff there. Next, John Winter Russell. So we're starting to get into the pantheon of guard players coming out of Canada. John Winter Russell, very strong player. I believe, I don't remember if it was 3rd or 4th, but very well placing at the 2024 World Championships of Warhammer, part of Team Canada. John Winter Russell is a very, very good player overall. I don't believe any of the games at this event were streamed, but this is a very similar, if not an identical list to the one that we saw him play not only at WTC 2025, but also at Challengers Cup, if you watched one of my more recent videos about that. It is combined arms, but it is a very different look and a very different take on combined arms than we generally see, and I'm honestly a little bit surprised that more people aren't like copying this list, because it is a very good player who's been having some very good success. Anyway, 1 Keating Command Squad, Gaunt's Ghost, 1, 2 Tempestus Command Squads, 1 Rogaldorn, just the one with Grand Strategist, Ursula Creed, 1, 2 units of 10 Keating Shock Troops, 2 Toraxes, 1 10 Manitoulin Rough Riders, 1 Hellhound, 1, 2, 3 Kazarkin, 1 Lemuros Battle Tank, 1, 2 Scout Sentinels, Tempestus Scions, Tempestus Scions. So one of the things about this list that John is running is it has less firepower than a lot of other combined arms, right? You have the Rogaldorn, and the only other like battle tank that you have is a Lemuros battle tank with multi-meltas. It's relatively short range overall, and it doesn't have a ton of just like long range firepower. This is not an army that's trying to just win long range shooting duels. It can against some armies, but that's not really what it's going for. The big thing that's different about this is you do have the 2 Toroxes with 3 Kazarkin that are typically put inside, but you have this 10-man unit of Attilian Rough Riders. This is almost always going to be a rapid ingress unless you're worried about getting shoved on at the very beginning of the game. Excuse me. One of these Canadian shock troops typically is going to stand on the home before running out, but one of the other things that I do see in John's games is he is one of the most aggressive players in terms of taking Ursa Creed, a command squad, and a 10-man Cadians, and running them towards the natural. This is going to take up a similar role as a lot of 20-man Death Corps of Krieg, or if you've been watching like the Gustavo, Castellan Cadian command squad archetypes that we've been seeing. John Winter Russell does it with just the 10-man Cadians, Ursula, and a command squad a lot more aggressively than a lot of other players will do. And then we have the Toraxes with Kazarkin, and then these Tempestuous Scions. So I saw someone on Reddit ask about this a little bit earlier today. The main way that I was finding that I was getting use out of them is they are typically going to be rapid ingressing on turns 2 or 3 with the idea that they're going to rapid ingress somewhere safe. You're going to have the, I believe it has command rods on both of them. Command rod. Oh, this one has a plasma pistol, but you give one of them move, 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 and then you give a second order, and you're going to kill something small with it. You're going to kill like 5 Marines or a character, or maybe a transport that's hanging out on your opponent's natural objective. You're going to kill it, and then you can try and charge whatever's left and just put a lot of OC onto that objective immediately afterwards. So it's just a lot of OC. You're going to be trading about 155 points worth of stuff in order to deny your opponent 5 points, maybe get another secondary for yourself. And they're also a unit that, if that is not a very natural game plan, and it's not as good on Games Workshop terrain as it is on WTC or UKTC, or no, it's best on WTC, not as good on Games Workshop, and not as good on UKTC, but it still does its job in basically every version of terrain. But that's like the primary idea behind the unit. That's what you're going to be using it for in most of your games. If your opponent lets you have an opportunity to drop it behind enemy lines, then cool. You can go ahead and shoot things off their home objective. They are also a rapid reaction force if you really need to like put extra OC, and having something in Deep Strike also gives you an opportunity to threaten to rapid ingress onto primary in the middle of the board, so your opponent has to set up something in order to make sure you can't just drop something there, potentially score an extra 5 points that way. Anyway, John played this. He got 4 wins, then he lost to Death Watch in the final round in a very close game. Doesn't surprise me a ton. This army is going to be lacking a little bit on the ability to punch into those toughness 6 3-wound models that are very common in Death Watch. Anyway, next one we have David Gross playing at the NYO4 40K Grand Tournament. And David's a player who hasn't been playing quite as much recently, but seems to have a little bit more time. He went 4-0-1, getting 3rd overall, and he was playing a combined arms, and this is, again, a little bit different, but not super new in terms of a lot of stuff that's going on. We have 2 Rogothorn commanders, Sly Marbo, 1 10-man Canadian shock troops, 2 chimeras, and this is probably the most interesting part of David Gross's list. He's a pretty big proponent of 1 6-man Bulgaren squad, and instead of having a second 6-man, he really likes to have the 2 3-mans of Bulgaren, because you can do a lot of the same things with 2 3-mans that you can with a 6-man. It does lose a little bit of value in terms of the heroic intervention is not quite as good, but you are better able to hide 3-mans, and just by having the 2 different units, sometimes that gives you a little bit more flexibility on the board in matchups where just having a 6-man isn't quite as valuable. So David's been a pretty big proponent of this for a while. We have 2 Kazarkin, 1 Exterminator with multi-meltas, a 3rd Rogothorn battle tank, and then 2 Scout Sentinels. So this is not a subtle list coming out from David. It's got 3 Rogothorns, 1 Luminous Exterminator, so it's got a lot of firepower. You have 12 toughness 6, 4-up invul, 3 wound, -1 damage bodies going through, and you have some Kazarkin as rapid reactions. This is not a very subtle list coming through. It is going to go kill you. It's going to put a lot of pressure on the board relatively quickly, and because you have so much toughness 12 2+, or toughness 6, 4-up invul, like units, a lot of armies just do not have the damage to deal with that. And so David able to pilot this to a 3rd place victory, or a 3rd place at the NYO4. Next, Nick Jagiello, another member of the Canadians coming through. And this one is notable because it was, I believe it is our first Hammer of the Emperor event win. That's third place. Yeah, the first Hammer of the Emperor event win on this patch. I believe Nick was also the first person to get a Hammer event win, period. I think that's why I had him for the first time showing up as an interview. But anyway, he's doing it again. He's been really big on this style of play for a while. He calls it his pile of tanks. I don't know why he named it Ice Beams, but Nick's a funny guy, so I'll go ahead and give him that. He's got Gaunt's Ghost, one Rogaldorn with the this is the Grand Strategist equivalent, a second Rogaldorn, one 10-man Canadian Shock Troops, one 5-man Rough Riders, one 5-man Death Riders, one Hellhound, two Hellhound, one 5-man Krieg Engineers, one Exterminator, 1, 2, 3 Vanquishers, all with multi-meltas, one 5-man Rattlings, 1, 2, 3 units of Scout Sentinels. So, again, this is just a lot of firepower, not a very subtle list coming out from Nick, and one of the big things that he posted in the Discord fairly recently is he posted like an image of, I believe it was turn 1, and they were playing like Sweeping Engagement or Dawn of War, one of the long board edge deployments, and he just had the entire army just like pushing up the board very, very quickly. Nick loves to get into the fight almost immediately, and he loves all the move blocking that comes along with the fact that this army is very quick. He's got the Rattlings, where if you are smart with the move, shoot, move, the infiltrate, and like your initial move and your potentially your charges, you have a lot of control over movement really early on. You pair that with the Death Riders here. He's kind of got a lot of just like tools in the toolbox, right? 5-man Rough Riders, 5-man Death Riders, 5-man Engineers, Rattlings, and then Scout Sentinels. The army is very, very fast. He's got a lot of pieces that he doesn't need to shoot if he doesn't like need the extra firepower, and he can trade very effectively with the fact that the triple Vanquishers, they're still T11, 2-up save, 13 wounds. They're not easy to take down, and anything that is able to take down a Vanquisher is probably something that a Rogaldorn can immediately turn around and kill right away. He does tend to play most often on WTC terrain. I believe this event was also on WTC terrain, so if you're worried about playing too many tanks, there is a video, or there is a stream of, I think it was round 5 on Tabletop Live, if you're interested in seeing how this list was actually piloted by Nick. Okay. After Nick, we have Brent Gibson. This is probably the most interesting list that we currently have coming out this weekend because it was Siege Regiment. And Brent ended up playing this. I believe this was his first 4-1. I saw him mention something in one of the Discords that I'm in. So he goes 4-1, getting second place at a relatively small event. One of the things about this, he does end up losing his second round. And if you're familiar with how like brackets work in general, if you lose early, you're always going to be playing up against people that have lost a game as well. And so the fact that the early loss comes in does mean that Brent didn't have the toughest opponents at this event. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the list and kind of talk about it from there. So what's Siege Regiment? You have 1 Cadian Command Squad, 1 Lord Solar, 1 Military Tempest Command Squad with the flash grenades. I believe this is the Cannot Be Overwatched enhancement, I think. 1, 2 Rogaldorns, 1, 2 Cadian Shock Troops, 1 20-man of Death Corps of Krieg, 1 Chimera, 1, 2 Death Riders, 1 Kazarkin, 1 Exterminator, 2 Exterminator, both with multi-meltas, 1 Scout Sentinel, 1 5-man Scions, and an additional 5-man Scion. So you have one of them that's going to be given the, excuse me, one of them's going to be given the Military Tempest Command Squad, so you have the Sustained, and I think Flash Grenades is the Can't Be Overwatch, regardless of what it is. You still have a lot of damage, and so you do have several units, right? You have the Military Tempest Command Squad, the 2 Rogaldorns, and the Cadians that are joined to the Cadian Command Squad. These all have access to the full rerolls while they're within 12 of something on the other side. It is pretty natural to do it with the Military Tempest Command Squad because they are, when they're deep striking, they're almost always going to be within 12 of the thing that they're trying to reroll into. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I take one look at this and I think, this looks like a very normal combined list. So I'm not super convinced that this list is better in Siege Regiment than if you took the exact same list and ran it in combined, but I do want to give a brief congratulations to Brent. Firstly, on the first time getting a 4-1 and also doing it with a detachment that not a lot of people are really looking at right now. If you're interested in In general, I think if you're trying to build a good Siege Regiment list, build the best combined list that you can, and then cross out combine and write Siege Regiment at the top. I'm pretty sure that's about the best way to do it. There's some cool stuff that you could do. I still don't think Krieg command squads are any good, even in this detachment. But if you want to run like a Cadian Castellan with the Cadian command squad and do similar things to like what Gustavo is doing in combined and just doing it in Siege Regiment, it's probably going to be fine. Anyway, after Brent, we had a couple of events also coming up in Canada. Wyatt Jensen, a name I haven't come across before. At least I don't think so. But Wyatt was playing with the Hawaii 05 tag, so maybe it's just because they don't travel as often as one might expect. Anyway, combined arms coming through. Canadian Command Squad with the Death Mask of Alanius. Gaunt's Ghost, 1-2 Krieg Command Squads. I just mentioned this. I don't think this unit is particularly good, but let's take a look at the rest of the things that are surrounding it. 1 Lord Solar. So you can immediately notice like the unusual thing about this list is there are no Rogaldorn commanders, which is a bit interesting. 1 Canadian Shock Troops, 1-2-20 Death Corps of Krieg, going to be joined to the Krieg Command Squad. What does the Krieg Command Squad do? It allows you to like be ordered and like have OC even while battle shocked or something to that effect. I'm not sure that's like really worth 65 points instead of just having like 2 more squads of dudes. Um, anyway, it's also got 2 basilisks coming through. Not a unit I'm a big fan of. 1-2 Lehman Russ battle tanks, 1-2 Lehman Russ demolishers, and an exterminator. So I'm gonna take a quick swig of water. This is another list that is rather surprising to me. A lot of these units are things that I'm not really big fans of, and one of the other things that jumps out at me is the number of heavy bolters that are stapled onto things. So heavy bolters, heavy bolters, heavy bolters, heavy bolters, heavy bolters. They're fine on the basilisk, but it's a lot of like odd units coming out all at once, and it doesn't necessarily have the ability to order all the tanks all at the same time, right? Because you have one, two, three, wait, one, two, three, four, five, and then you have the 2 basilisks, so that's 7. There are 7 tanks here asking for orders all at the same time, and you only have access to 3. So I'm kind of expecting when I look at this list that Wyatt is probably spending a lot of his command points on the flexible command so that his Cadians and his Krieg command squads can order the tanks as necessary. But ultimately, you still have a lot of things to choke up the midboard with. The 2 26-man Death Corps of Krieg units, as well as the Demolishers, able to put a lot of pressure on the board relatively early. I don't really understand why any of them have heavy bolters, but it ultimately works. So congratulations coming out to Wyatt on the 4-1 at Kipper's Melee. Another player that I have seen fairly often, Patrick Greatbatch, had a lot of success on the previous patch in the June to September time period. I believe he showed up on the spreadsheet like 4 times before taking a month or 2 off, a little bit of time away from the game. But he's back and he's playing Hammer the Emperor once again. He's got Gaunt's Ghost, 1 Rogaldorn with Veteran Crew. This is, I think it's the reroll 1's enhancement. 2nd Rogaldorn Commander, 1 Cadian Shock Troops, 1 Catachan Jungle Fighters, 2 Toraxes, 1 5-man Death Rider, 1 Hellhound, 2 Kazarkin, 1 Exterminator with Plasma, 2 Vanquishers, both with Multi-Melta, 1 5-man Ratlings, Scout Sentinel, Scout Sentinel. So this is it has a lot of similarities to what we were just looking at with Nick Gigello's list previously, right? You got a lot of tools in the toolbox. You have your Death Riders, you have your Ratlings, you have a couple of Scout Sentinels. The big trade that we're seeing coming out from this one is instead of having more tanks, Patrick opting to drop a Rogaldorn Commander and a Lehman Russ Vanquisher in exchange for 2 Toraxes and the Kazarkin that go inside as well. So it's still a lot of firepower. You still have a lot of control over the board in general. You're still able to do a lot. But one of the things that this army does in ways that Nick Gigello's army can't do is the Toraxes give you a little bit of extra reach to go those 19 inches. 19? 21 inches very consistently in order to deposit Kazakin on the far side of things. And because the Toroxes and Hammer the Emperor have the ability to go through walls for 1 CP, you have a little bit more reach. You can get into pockets that Nick Giello's list really couldn't. So whereas Nick is trying to force his opponent to come out into the open so you can kill them, Patrick has a little bit more tools to go to where his opponents are to pick off those little bit of pieces. Patrick also he ended up losing in the first round, so he didn't have the toughest route on his way to getting this 4-1. However, he's done it plenty of times before, so congrats to Patrick on this one. The last one I want to show you guys is Chris Saylor's 5-1 going at the Rooks 40K Open. This one, if you do want to watch it, this one was on Wargames Live, so you can watch his game going up against James Walsh, and James Walsh, I think, showed up like 3 times on the stream overall this weekend, playing Dark Angels Company of Hunters, I think it's called. It's an uncommon detachment that you don't really see all that much, but I think it has a lot in common with Stormlands. Very focused on like mounted, very fast, and does a decent amount of damage. But it was a very unusual list coming out from James. Anyway, very long list name. And the other big thing about Chris that I do want to point out is he was wearing a belt, like a wrestler's belt, and like a commissar outfit. So he was really getting into the whole way that he was really getting into the lore. He was very clearly a cool guy, and I would love to play against him sometime if we ever happen to find ourselves at the same event. Anyway, Chris seemed really cool. The one thing I will say is I don't think he played the round 6 particularly well. However, he won his previous 5 games, so, you know, that's the important part. His list was Gaunt's Ghosts, 1, 2, 3 Rogel Thorns, 1 with the 6 of Field Pain enhancement, 1 with the reroll 1s enhancement, and 1, I think this is bonus OC. I think this makes the Rogel Thorn OC 8, which is funny. 1 10-man Canadian Shock Troops, 1 10-man with Death Corps of Krieg, 1 2 Toroxes, 2 units of 6 Bulgren, all with Brute Shields and Bulgren Mauls, 1 10-man Kazarkin, 1 5-man Engineers, 1 Ratlings, Scout Sentinel, Scout Sentinel. So this is pretty normal. Typically, though, when we see what I just call Dorns and Bulgren style of lists, which are very common around the time of WTC, we would typically see these played in combined just for that little bit of extra damage that the lethal hits does provide, and you wouldn't necessarily care a whole lot about orders for your Bulgren, partly because you can't do anything about it, but also it would allow you to have Kazarkin, a bunch of Kazarkin, a bunch of transports that would individually punch up as well. Chris has ignored that in exchange for just having an extra Rogel Thorn commander, that these can all be very fast. They can get out onto the board very quickly, and they have just so many guns, so they are able to be very effective in that way. Bulgren going to take up a lot of space. This is one of the big keys about playing these kinds of lists, is not being afraid to lose Bulgren models. You just put them out in the midboard, demand that your opponent deal with them, and then you just line up 3 Dorns behind and go, what, you're afraid to deal with my Bulgren? Good, now the Bulgren are going to charge you. Or they come out and fight your Bulgren, you kill them back. There's very little in the game that cost effectively deals with Bulgren, and you're able to create a lot of pressure that way. So good stuff to Chris overall. A lot of power coming out of this list, and going 5-1. Very good result overall up in Montana at Rooks 40K Open. Okay, so those were the 10 singles lists that I wanted to show you guys. Like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of like super new stuff. The most interesting things coming through, Wyatt Jensen with a very unusual list, lots of heavy bolters, and not a lot of ways to like order all of these vehicles all at the same time. And then Brent Gibson coming out with a list that was in Siege Regiment, and that's probably the most interesting thing about it. Anyway, with all that said, going back to teams a little bit, we do have Philip Koenig. I think it's Koenig. He said it was like the ooh in blue cheese. So maybe that's an American accent thing, but, you know, as my third try, I'm going to go Philip Koenig, and we'll see if he corrects me again. Anyway, this is his second teams event in as many weeks. Last week, the previous weekend, he went 3 wins, no losses, and 2 draws. This weekend, he went 4 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. And his team, I believe, got first. I think they also went 4 wins, no losses, and 1 draw. But as far as I can tell, this is a carbon copy of the list he played last week, so we're just going to go over it very quickly. 1 Canadian Command Squad, 1 Military Tempest, Militarium Tempestus Command Squad with Grand Strategist, 1 Organ Bodyguard, 2 Rogothorn Commanders, 1 10-man Catachan, or 10-man Cadian, 10-man Catachan, Chimera, Torox, Hellhound, Kazarkin, Ratling, Scout Sentinel, 10-man Aquilons, and 10-man Scions. So I believe this looks very similar. You got the 2 Rogaldorns. Does he still have the volley guns? He does indeed. So as far as I can tell, this seems to be an exact carbon copy of the list that he played the previous week. He did mention in the comments of the previous week, if you did not see, that the volley guns were a bit more all-round than I had initially given them credit for when I was looking at it the last time. Because the volley guns, especially if you can pump up their AP, it gives you a very natural target alongside one of your Rogel Thorns. Target a Rogel Thorn, target the Tempestus Scions, make them shoot the same thing, and suddenly these volley guns are AP2. You have access to a Hellhound to give it ignores cover, so it's actually like a little bit more well-rounded, and it probably does like comparable damage to melt it into everything but the highest toughness and like 2+ vehicles. But regardless of what it is, good stuff to fill up coming out for this one once again. And I'm impressed that you had like the stamina to just play back to back teams events. So good job on that. Overall, like I said, it was a pretty decent week coming through, over 50% the first time we've managed to do that on this data slate. So really good event, or a really good weekend. Overall, it was a pretty big weekend, and the other big thing that I would like caution people for, I do think Guard is in a bit of a tougher spot right now. I know several players from my discussions are not feeling so hot about playing Guard at the World Championships of Warhammer, so we'll see what kind of things are going on. I do know that there's kind of like 2 large camps of people right now. There's the camp of people who are planning to go to the World Championships of Warhammer, which is happening in like 3 or 4 weeks, and they're gearing up. Almost all of them, from what I can tell, are planning to play either Combined or Recon, and then there's another group of people who just aren't planning for the World Championships. They're kind of playing whatever. Once again, I'm planning to play Mechanized Assault at my event at the end of the month, and then we'll kind of go from there. I think I have a Teams event that's happening the weekend after the World Championships, so we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning into this one, talking about all the new stuff that's going on in the world of 40K and the world of Guard. See you guys all next week. Bye-bye.